This is our... Hello, hello. I'm not sure you're working. Check. Okay. All right, sorry about that. Shh. This is a study guide for you for the endocrine system. It looks fairly intimidating, but I'll give you this clue. If you look basically from the middle where it says pituitary gland all the way down to the pineal gland, they're basically, all they're saying is you should know the hormones, the location it is, the hormones it secretes, and what it does. So it looks more intimidating just because I thought it was easier for you if I put those all separate rather than just listing all of the glands and in one sentence saying know these pieces. So it looks larger than it is. This has often been a unit that I will kind of truncate and make very short. But with moving into our WAU piece, I wanted to make sure we got the whole solid piece of this unit, more than just a little piece to it. So that is there. I will say to you, because I'm an open and honest kind of person with you, this is the first time that I am teaching this unit from the textbook like this. Again, what I've used in the past is use other pieces to teach, and we use the textbook a little bit, but not necessarily going through all the individual pieces of it. So, I'm telling you that I'm learning it just as well as you did. I was reading this last night. I was reading it this morning. I was preparing for us to have conversations about this. So, let's learn together, eh? I think that sounds like fun. All right, so let's jump right in. Again, this is up on Schoology as well. The different the slides are up there. The study guide's up there. It's like 100 degrees in this classroom today. It's yes. Do you like what happened to this is my brand new shirt? Do you like I got ink on it today? Yeah, it makes me happy. It's life. It's life. Okay, so sum up endocrine system in one word. Hormones. Or secretions, not bad. Secretions aren't bad. But hormones, right? Hormones is the key for the endocrine system. And these hormones are going to what? Like, what do they act on? The receptors on what? On what kind of cells? Target cells, right? And it can be any kind of cells. But each hormone has a specific target cell. And they do usually react on cells that are far away from them. Now, when you talk more, we'll learn more about these. There are different kinds of glands, different kinds of pieces. About a couple of spots down on the study guide, it talks about endocrine versus paracrine versus autocrine versus exocrine. These are basically talking about what types of tissues are being affected by these different hormones, okay? Up here, they show you these two, exocrine and endocrine. Exo means what? Do you remember? Outside, sure. So these are stuff that are being secreted outside the body. What kind of things get secreted outside of our body? Sweat is a perfect example, okay? So those sweat glands are exocrine glands. They're secreting something to the outside. This up here says it secretes products into ducts, which of course you remember the ducts coming out to the outside of the skin, the epithelial system. The endocrine system are secreting products into body fluids that affect those target cells. There's two other little categories that your textbook gives for these kind of things. That's the paracrine and the autocrine. Most endocrine hormones go far away. Are you understanding what I'm saying? For example, a hormone in the brain is being secreted, and that hormone goes all the way down into your digestion system. Large distance, right? A paracrine gland is something that secretes, and it affects a tissue right nearby it. So actually, that pituitary gland will often secrete something to affect the pineal gland, or will affect the thymus, or the thyroid. Very small distances. We call those paracrine glands. And then the autocrine, what do we mean by auto? Do you remember this prefix? To itself, right? Auto. Remember, autoimmune is where your body's attacking itself. So an autocrine means it's secreting something that affects itself. Kind of weird, but true. And again, different glands do it different ways. Yes, sir? Close. Endocrine is far away. Yeah. Which that's the main majority that we deal with, are these endocrine glands. All right, let's keep going. Some general characteristics, some general things about this endocrine system. Its main function is to do what? We already said to produce hormones. But what is the point of those hormones? Regulate, to communicate, right? To say, hey, you need to start producing this, or you need to stop producing this, okay? So the endocrine system is communication. Now, is there another form of communication in our body, another system that does communication? Nervous system, right? And so that's one of the questions on your study guide, is that you should be comfortable with how these things are similar and how they are different, right? There's a nice little picture on page 303. It's not on the slideshow, so I can't show it to you. But they show you the differences between these guys. Can you give me some general differences between nervous system and endocrine system? What do you think, Ansel? Hormones, yeah, sure. And you're talking about the glands themselves, sure. So different type of tissue. Okay, so you've got these synapses, these junctions, right? And are you comfortable that the neurons, they all go very specific places, right? Like there is a specific nerve that goes from my brain to my little finger, right? Whereas hormones are not so specific in location, in the fact that they're carried where? How do these hormones travel around our body? Okay, in the bloodstream. Specifically, the capillaries are going to specific areas. But yeah, through the bloodstream, right? So it's very generalized. Does that make sense? The hormones that affect my little finger, though there's not really many, also go to my thumb and to my toes, right? But maybe the receptors aren't there on those cells. They're just there on my little finger. Are you with me? There's not actually something in my little finger the hormone affects, but I'm just using that as the example. Make sense? Quicker nervous system or quicker endocrine system? Nervous, right? If I want to move my hand off a burning stove, I don't want to wait for hormones to be secreted and then travel down the bloodstream and then cause a... No, I want the nerve to quick pop that muscle and get it off there, right? Oh, by the way, well, never mind. We'll talk about that later. Are you with me? So some differences between how these guys work. I think I just simply wrote it as compare and contrast nervous system and endocrine system. Sounds like a fairly easy test question, right? You sure can, yes. Sorry, excuse me. Yes, ma'am. All right. And when we say metabolic processes, what do we mean by that? I had that question yesterday. It was a good question. No, you can't answer because I told you yesterday. What do y'all think? What do we mean when it says it regulates metabolic processes within the cells? I mean, what does that mean? You can memorize it, but what does it mean? Please. Sure. So, yes, you're talking about how the endocrine system is regulated. But what are the hormones? We're saying the hormones are regulating the metabolic processes of cells. What do we mean by that? How fast the reactions? Okay, sure. The metabolic processes is just how the cell is alive, right? How it's living, how it's working, how it's doing its job. Whether it's being stimulated to do that more, to do it less, to take the ATPs, we're talking about the actual cellular respiration, to make those ATPs more and use them more, or to slow that down. Does that make sense? Homeostasis, sure, that's a great word to use with that. The hormones help regulate that, help keep us in that nice homeostasis place. again, we've already talked about some of these pieces here, that their actions are very precise. So while the hormone doesn't go from the brain right to a specific area, right, it goes through the whole bloodstream, it does have a very specific target cell. Because only the cells that have that specific receptor are going to be affected by that hormone. Does that make sense? Right. We're talking general endocrine system, yeah. So even the paracrine and the autocrines will still only affect the specific target cells. Okay? And there are lots of endocrine glands. And this picture is there in your textbook on page 304, showing you just the general location of these different endocrine glands. Sorry? They're showing you that the adrenal glands on top of the kidneys are what they're showing you there. So the kidney itself is not really a gland, but the adrenal gland is a very important one. The pancreas, the adrenal glands, the thymus, the thyroid, our pituitary gland, our pineal gland, the ovaries, the testes, and of course your hypothalamus, which, remember we learned about hypothalamus in the nervous system, right? So this is kind of the bridge between nervous system and endocrine system. Yes, sir? The simple answer would be that it produces a hormone, that it secretes something that affects other tissues. It's a good question. Are you with me, my friends? And so when I'm talking about on that list of the different glands, location-wise, this is what we mean by location-wise, right? So not that you'll have to be able to draw this diagram or show me, but you should be comfortable that these different, in the brain are the pituitary and the pineal glands, right? In the neck, chest area, thyroid, parathyroid, thymus. The adrenal glands are over the kidneys, like you said. The reproductive glands, the ovaries, the testes. Does that make sense? Those are our locations we're talking about. Okay, let's talk about some actions, how these guys work. And you can kind of break them into two different groups, these different actions, okay? Steroidal and non-steroidal. Okay, and if you remember way back to chapter 2 when we looked at the different kinds of molecules, right? That these are some of our organic molecules, these steroids, they were in that category of the lipids, right? Of those fatty acids and the cellular membrane phospholipids, right? The steroids were in that same category. And the key point is, even if I only have a little bit of this hormone, very minute concentrations, I can still cause big changes. So they're very potent, very powerful, these little tiny hormone guys. So let's talk about the steroids first. And there's great pictures that are here on page 305 that I've directed you to in your study guide. These are figures 11.3 and 11.4. They look like this, right? This is the first one. That help you see visually how these work. So again, we're talking about the steroidal ones first. And the steroid ones are lipid soluble, which means they can go through the cell wall. Because remember, the cell is that phospholipid bilayer, right? And so it can go through the cell wall into the cell. It can actually even go all the way down into the nucleus, because the nucleus is where it actually does its work. There are receptors for those steroid hormones that are inside the target cells of the nucleus, in the nucleus. And what that's doing, and you can see the picture there on page 305, once that hormone binds to that receptor, then that hormone receptor complex, it binds with the DNA. Now, what's the point of DNA? It's a code, certainly. It makes what? Makes us who we are, certainly, yep. One of the main functions of DNA is what? It's a recipe book. What do I mean by that? To make not only new cells, but even at the smaller level, to make proteins, right? to make all the proteins you need to do all the things in your body, the DNA is the code for that, right? It's a recipe book for all of those proteins. So when that hormone binds onto the DNA, it's telling it, hey, we want you to make some specific protein that otherwise it wouldn't make if that hormone wasn't present. Does that make sense? So again, I'm showing you the picture. The steroid comes through the cell membrane, again, because it's lipid soluble, comes even through the nuclear membrane into the nucleus, and binds with that receptor, that target cell, right, that has the little receptor that matches with the hormone. And then that complex binds to the DNA. And when it binds to that DNA, it's then going to trigger, oops, I guess that's all it has for this one. It's going to trigger some messenger RNA to be formed. Now go back, way back to this transcription, translation thing. Do you remember? What does the messenger RNA do? Good. It takes that code, takes that recipe out of the nucleus, and where does it take it to? A ribosome, right? And the ribosome actually does the creating of this new protein, right? Transcription, translation. Transcribing to write down the code to take it outside, translating to actually make it into a protein. Does that make sense, my friends? And again, this is steroidal hormones. These are the steroid hormones that they behave in this manner. Be cool? And again, I gave you just kind of one question there. It's a fairly large, complex one. Compare and contrast how steroid and non-steroidal hormones affect target cells. This is how the steroidal one works, right? So I'm expecting you to be comfortable with how that works. Let's move on to the non-steroidal ones. We'll talk. Let me do these guys first, and we'll talk more about differences between. Okay? So in the non-steroidal hormones, right? And again, steroid versus non-steroidal. The non-steroidal hormones are combining with receptors in the target cell membranes. Okay, so there's a binding that happens just like in the steroidal ones, right? But where is that binding occurring at? In where? The cell membrane, right? Where did it happen in the steroidal ones? In the nucleus, right? So there's a difference. You with me? Cell membrane on the outside of the cell, right? And again, the pictures there on page 305 are very helpful. Okay? And that hormone receptor complex, and your textbook calls it the first messenger, it triggers a cascade of biological activity. What they're saying is there's a complex process involved here that we don't need you to learn yet. Okay, you want to keep going in the world of A&P, they'll teach you all the steps that are involved in that cascade. But they're just saying, hey, it's going to set off a process here. Okay? And that, to simplify it, that hormone complex activates what they call a G protein. And that G protein activates an enzyme that is bound to the inside of that cellular wall. So let's look at the picture here, right? That's steroidal, my apologies. Wow, this is interesting. I got moved around somewhere. Sorry, here we go. That's what I want. Okay. So again, the steroid hormone is coming, and it's bonding onto that receptor in the cell membrane, right? When it binds, it activates this G protein that's on the bottom of that receptor. And that G protein then makes the adenylate cyclase, and these are big, fun names, even for me to pronounce. It activates this guy. Man, I'm sorry. For some reason, I keep getting myself messed up on where we are. Here we go. Are we good? So again, hormone, non-steroidal hormone bonds onto the receptor. The receptor activates the G protein. The G protein activates the enzyme, the adenylate cyclase. or cyclase. Be cool? And that enzyme breaks down ATP. Actually, it's removing 2 phosphates from it. So it's not becoming ADP. It goes through a different process that produces cyclic AMP, which they call the second messenger. Which that in turn activates protein enzymes that activates proteins. Whew. So it's activate, activate, activate. You see this kind of cascade they're showing you? I get your question, I promise, 1 second. That this makes this go, which makes this go, which makes that go, which makes that. Are you with me? That kind of cascade, that's the word they use there. Yes, ma'am. Yes. I'll make sure I tell you the right thing. Oh, the first message is actually the complex, the hormone receptor complex. So where the binding of that non-steroidal hormone to the receptor. Okay? Should we roll through it one more time here? Again, this is not easy stuff. There's some complexity involved. Don't get freaked out by the names. Just stay with me. All right? So here we are, number 1. The non-steroidal hormone, right, is bonding to the receptor, right, the target cell. So when those guys bond, it makes a hormone receptor complex. That's our first messenger. Okay? So basically, it's taking the information from the outside of the cell and bringing it down into the cell, right? That's why they're calling it a messenger. It's taking the message, hey, we need you to make some proteins down into the cell. When that happens, then what happens? The G protein is activated. That G protein activates the adenylate cyclase, right? Which then changes ATP into CAMP. You with me still? And then that CAMP is what activates the enzymes for the proteins to get them to make these new proteins, to get them to produce what the whole point of that hormone was to do, was to make certain proteins, right? Yes, ma'am. Well, let's just use the pieces that are here, right? So it activates the protein enzymes that activate the proteins. And let's continue on. These activated proteins induce changes in the cell. So these proteins are what are actually causing the cell to change in some way to do what the hormone wanted it to do. Does that make sense? And what this number 6 is telling you is that, hey, not all non-steroidal hormones use that CAMP. Right? If I go back here, not all of them work here at CAMP. There can be other enzymes that are there that the hormones affect, that the adenylate cyclase affects, to do other things. They've just chosen CAMP as the example that we're learning as far as how non-steroidal hormones work. And they gave us a couple other options of that. The dicloglycerol or the inositol triphosphate. You say words like this, people think you're smart, right? Because they sound impressive. Are you with me, my friends? I have one more piece I want to share with you today, and then we're going to do a little bit. But I'm going to pause. I think you need to digest this a little bit. Okay? What I want you to do is with your partner next to you, so in groups of 2, please, I want you to go through, please, both the steroidal and the non-steroidal. What are the steps? What's that cascade your book likes to use? Okay? Run through that, please. I'll give you about 5 minutes. I heard lots of good things as we went around. Any questions going through this, going forward, sir?
So what's the CAMP? It's to like the inactive proteins that just makes them active.
Right. Right. That's exactly right. And again, my diagram here is a little different than yours. I like yours much better, I'll be honest with you. It's less complex. Okay? That CAMP is telling a protein to do something. So remember, in the steroidal hormones, Stay with me now. There were no proteins around, and it was actually telling the DNA to make this new protein to do something, right? But in the non-steroidal, the protein is already made. It's just like chilling. It's just inactive, right? And we want that chilling protein to start doing something, right? And so that's what that CAMP does, is it says, hey, let's work. Let's do it. Does that make sense? So again, that would be another difference between steroidal and non-steroidal. The steroidal is actually making new proteins. The non-steroidal is just activating these inactive guys. Other questions? Thank you. That was a good one. Ready for a test right now? I'll just pull it out. And let's go. I got you. Short-term memory, right? Excellent. Good, good. Last piece for today. Last piece for today are the prostaglandins. The prostaglandins. These are locally produced lipids that affect the organ in which they are produced. Let's see, prostaglandins in your textbook are here on page 306. And again, these are also regulating cells. And they do a whole bunch of different things. They're actually very potent, like very strong, right? Only need a very small amount of these guys. And we don't like produce them and then just store them someplace. Like they're only made when they're needed, because they're so powerful. What do? Here's just a sampling of what they can do. They can make smooth muscle relax, but they can also make smooth muscle contract. They can cause other hormones to be secreted. They can increase blood pressure. They can increase inflammation. They do a lot of different things across a lot of different areas. Okay? Sir? Are you thinking about the prostate gland? So no, that would be a different something. That's an actual gland of the reproductive system, but it basically is the main component that produces semen. The actual piece that allows you to have kids would be produced in the testes themselves, the sperm, from there. So no, similar name. I thought the same when I first read it, but no, different piece. And if I'm not mistaken, let's see, on your study guide, it says just be able to understand what a prostaglandin is and what are some of the effects that they have. So again, these are just specifically targeted hormones. Very potent, very fast acting, and they have, again, a wide variety of these different uses. Are you with me, my friends? What I'm encouraging you to do, I'm going to stop my recording here.